Hello there lovely people. You know something is amiss when this thing shows up. Anyhow, I have to brag. I have a sick fork. This one. Take a look at this. It's yellow, custom painted. It has a lot of trouble. It's very plush. Lots of adjustments, and unfortunately the adjective I used before isn't about any of those things. This thing is actually sick, or more specifically it's ill, it's broken. For the last few days or last few rides I have a problem with this fork leaking air. You can even hear this. I hope at least you will. Now I can't blame esse for this because, well, if you don't know, this is a esse durolux 2013 vintage, the RC2 model, and I can't blame esse for this because, well, this fork has been used roughly, it hasn't been really taken care of, it has been painted three times, including powder coating, so it was heated to quite significant temperature, and generally speaking it hasn't been cared for. So it's not really surprising that something simply gave way. Although I have to note that since this was an endemic problem for this particular model of fork, some people were trying to solve this by replacing the seal on the air piston with an O-ring that's slightly bigger than the original one. The original is a scoop seal. Now it was replaced with an O-ring which supposedly gave much better seal, and that was true. However, it also gave tons of stanchion stiction. So after I painted the fork, I replaced the seal, because I bought this fork with that particular O-ring. I replaced that O-ring with an original seal, and I started to get leakage problems. So with that in mind, I'm going to show you what I'm going to do about this. This is a U-turn cartridge or U-turn assembly from RockShox Judy something. I don't really know the model, however, I don't really know the year. However, what I'm going to do, or what I'm going to attempt to do, is to make the entire assembly that will allow me to convert my durolux to air-assisted coil. Essentially, this is going to provide me the main support for the coil, and I'm going to add a little bit of air to control for the sag. Unless it's not needed, then all is golden. Essentially, I'm going to make something that Marzocchi was making for years. Anyhow, here's how it goes. This is what Santur originally does in this fork. This is the upper stanchion, this is the lower stanchion. Now inside there's a shaft with a polymer piston on top, and on this polymer piston there is a scoop seal. Above that scoop seal there's a certain amount of oil, which, when the pressure in the main chamber increases, is going to push the scoop seal, which is going to get bigger, and it's going to cling to the walls of the inside of the upper stanchion. That's going to create an airtight chamber. However, I'm guessing there was a production run of these forks, and I know that it's only these forks because I had something like 20 esse forks which used this kind of arrangement, and none of them had air leakage problems. So, anyhow, I'm guessing that there was a production run of duroluxes that the main air piston was either undersized, oversized, something was out of tolerance, and as the fork compresses, it allowed the air to escape to the lower chamber, and essentially that makes the fork simply lose air and dive into the trouble. What I'm going to do? I'm going to make a air piston that's going to sit much lower on the stanchion. I'm going to make a shaft, and since I have two such scoop seals I bought in the beginning of this year, I'm going to use the redundancy of the department redundancy suggestions, and I'm going to make a piston that's going to use two such scoop seals. Possibly that's going to be an overkill, but I don't care, I have the stuff. Above those I'm going to trap the coil spring from this one, and the assembly is going to look somewhat like this. And below the air piston there's probably going to be place for a spacer or two that will allow me to control the height of the fork, essentially its travel. And above this, on both sides of the air chamber, I'm going to most likely need to make a saddle for this coil spring, because obviously that's not going to work out of the box. So let's start with the process. And we're going to start by disassemble the durolux and see what's happening inside, because maybe, well, we'll see. Alright, let's disassemble the thing. Because the air escaped to the lower legs and there's a sealing oil behind this, I don't want to get sprayed with oil, so this needs to be done carefully. Alright. Oh, there you go. This is the sealing oil that seeped to the lower legs. Now if this fork was functioning correctly, this wouldn't happen. Alright, if you don't know, this is the rebound cartridge or the dumping cartridge. I'm not going to do anything with this one, so now I'm going to be measuring things, and since this is going to take quite a bit of time, there's a magical cut that's going to happen. Alright, some bad news here. Now I know why the fork was leaking air, because I don't know whether I'll be able to, I probably won't be able to show it to you, but there are these long scratches on the inside of the main air chamber where the piston was traveling. I gather that they were either created during something, I don't know, but most likely they were created when this piston here had the massive O-ring instead of the factory scoop seal, so it got scratched, and when I returned to the original configuration it simply started leaking air. So I am guessing that it's not going to happen, that I'm going to be able to salvage this tension. However, I have polished using a drill and some steel wool. I managed to polish the other tension by doing this. Was awesome. And it seems that the walls here are perfectly smooth, so if everything fails I will be able to return to the factory configuration in the other stanchion. However, now I'm going to try to polish sides of this chamber, because I hope I'm going to be able to return to how it was envisioned by the makers of the fork. Well, this is interesting because I can't show it to you because the camera isn't going to focus, but there is a taper here and there isn't one here, which suggests that the threads on both stanchions are different. There's a taper in the inside of the stanchion. Well, let me try to. I hope it's going to be visible. There's a taper and I hope you can see the scratches. It's probably not going to focus on them. And there is no taper here. Interesting. Alright, now I'll try to polish the original air piston side. Okay, so a few days have passed since I last was tinkering with the fork, and I've been thinking about how to progress. Because you see, the situation is developing in a rather nasty direction, and I think the time has come to upgrade, or downgrade, considering how we're going to look at it. I'm going to upgrade this video from I'm going to make a pretty cool conversion of my fork to I am desecrating a corpse for the enjoyment of others. Because here's the deal. The problem I'm having is that there are scratches in the main air chamber of the fork, which... Get lost, mosquito. There are horizontal scratches from the piston traveling up and down because it was using an oversized O-ring which scratched the stanchions, or at least that's what I'm thinking it was. And those scratches allow air and sealing oil to seep through, well, the seal. So the fork is losing air. I was trying to polish using this plunger with a steel wool on the end and a drill. I was trying to polish them, and I managed to flatten them to where they don't have this this ridge on the edge. So this kind of helps. I mean, I can insert the piston, and if I add some sealing liquid, it seems to seal. However, as I was toying with it, I obviously wanted to use this this coil spring. However, first of all, the spring is rattling in the inside of the fork, and it is way too hard for the fork to actually operate. I even made measurements how long of a shaft I need to make. However, I don't think it's gonna work. You see, this spring is approximately 30 centimeters long, and I'm going to show you. Here's my notes. I need to make a shaft that is approximately 225 millimeters long in order to get 175 millimeters of travel. However, this spring is too hard, so this would be a fool's errand. I would need to find a softer spring. However, at this point I would most likely need to find a different spring, different length, and at this point it starts to be kind of, well, chasing the rabbit without ever hoping to catch it, because each spring I'm gonna get, unless it is from the same fork I was using before, is going to have a different length and a different hardness. So I would need to make a shaft for a different spring, or I would make a custom spring, but that would require me to fabricate the parts all the time. However, I am not a fork manufacturer, so obviously once I use this spring, any spring, stop doing this. Once I use this spring or any spring, I'm going to scratch the inside of this tension. Then I'm never going to be able to seal this inside. And until I get a proper spring for my particular setup, I would need to fabricate parts for every spring I'm going to try, or I need to make a new spring or order a custom spring. Essentially, that would be too much work for a fork. That I said that's essentially worthless at this point, because this is dead. There's no sensible way of getting this, at least not a sensible way unless you have a workshop like mine, to fix this fork other than replacing the upper tubes or the upper stanchions. However, the upper stanchions are 1/4 of the price of a complete fork, so obviously this makes no sense. So, what I'm going to do now? Well, obviously, I think I have to live with the thought that the time has come to buy a new fork. Then, until I get one, what I'm going to do, I think I'm going to continue polishing the inside, hoping that I'm going to get the inside to be perfectly, well, almost perfectly, or as good as I can get, flat, so the piston's gonna seal. However, I am almost certain that once this hard coating, hard anodizing is gone, and it's going to be gone, then those scratches are going to get deeper and deeper on each stroke, so at a certain point this fork is going to die. But at least it's going to give me some time before I'm going to source another fork. Alternatively, I could manufacture some sort of a cartridge, but that's going to be more work than it's worth, so I think. So, oh, and by the way, if anything fails, I can always go bananas. I can always ream the ever-loving you-know-what out of the inner stanchion. That's going to expose the bare aluminum, which is going to be fairly easy to polish. So I should be able to get perfectly polished surface inside, and that should extend the life of a fork. But let's face it, that's pretty hardcore. And forks aren't that expensive. So let's try to polish the inside with this plunger, and we'll see what happens. Alright, I cleaned the stanchions as much as I could, or as much as I was willing to, but this spring, when I bought spare parts for this fork, I bought two main air chamber seals, and only one was used. But since I have a spare, and most likely I'm going to buy a different fork, it makes no sense to keep this to rot in 500 years. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the air piston, I'm going to widen this groove here to facilitate the second seal, and hopefully this redundant approach is going to make this thing a little more robust. And before you start, I know nothing about machining, I am learning, so most of the time I'm just bumbling and trying to find my way around the workshop, at least around the lathe. So if you have some suggestions, write them in the comments. But now, let's do some machining. Alright, cleaned it up. You know, if everything fails, I'm just going to machine a new air piston. Because why not? You gotta learn new skills. And experimenting on stuff is probably a good way to do it. Okay, let's mount this to a fork. And there you go, the Kona has been reunited with the durolux. Unfortunately, the durolux most likely is going to fail, so I'm going to get separated with my money. Because what I've done to the fork essentially just extends its agony. It's gonna die at a certain point because the bare aluminium I exposed has a different hardness than the extension coating. So once the piston is working inside, it's going to take out a different amount of the coat and the bare aluminium. So at a certain point, the difference in thickness is going to cause the air leakage again. It's inevitable. At a certain point, this fork is running on a borrowed time, and I'm fairly certain that, I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow when I go for a ride it would start leaking air. Anyhow, I've been shopping around for different forks. I even found, for example, Mazzocchi 5s or Matok or Manitou Matok or an X-Fusion Vengeance, because, you know, the problem for me with buying equipment is that I don't like buying on MSRP or the latest and greatest, because every time I've done so I've been greatly disappointed with the result. And obviously there is a different problem. I don't want my fork to be all black, and unfortunately all of them are, or most of them are, because most of the forks on the used market are everything that fell out of an OEM bike, which is pike of some sort. Anyhow, what I'm looking at this point is what I said: Mazzocchi 5s, there's a Manitou Matok in the red and black color scheme. I found, I think, X-Fusion Vengeance and then X-Fusion Metric. However, I've got a Metric on the other bike, and I like the fork, but I just don't want any once again the same fork. Seems weird. Besides, I had like 20 Santur forks in the last 10 years or so, so I don't want to have a fleet of the same fork, essentially. How petty is that? Anyhow, if you have a suggestion, oh, and there's always this, another mosquito, there's always this D&M upside down fork, the USD6, which is available on AliExpress. I'm even looking at it, although it has a 50mm axle, so it would be a bother to switch the hub on the front wheel. We'll see. Anyhow, I hope you like the content. I hope you learned something, because I definitely learned something, which is don't try to resurrect a corpse and then parade it in front of people, because it's creepy. And I hope to see you in the next video, and I hope you're going to like and share this video around and all that good things.